really pleased that we could do this panel, also because this is going to be one of the priorities, as you learned from Minister Bjerre during her speech this morning. That enlargement is one of the priorities of the Danish EU presidency. Enlarging the EU is a stronger EU. Sounds very well. Sounds wonderful. And then she said, not easy, but try and find solutions. During this panel, of course, I think we somehow will challenge this approach. Or perhaps also discuss it. And I very much invite you to be part of the discussion after we have the 3 presentations from the brilliant panelists, because I think this is really a super relevant discussion taking place at the moment around in European member countries and also outside the EU. So first of all, I want to introduce my panelists, and the first speaker is, I'm going to introduce you one by one, and then you'll start each of your presentation. And the first one is Saskia Hollander, who's a senior research fellow at the Clingendael Institute in The Hague. Saskia will be talking about the necessities to strengthen the EU rule of law toolbox in the context of EU enlargement. She also promised me to talk a little bit about how the debate looks in member countries, what's the situation these days. And then we will have Danijela Jaćimović, professor at the University of Montenegro, and also a TEPSA board member who will be talking about on the subject of shaping tomorrow Montenegro's path. But then you also promised me to focus a little bit during your talk on Western Balkans, and I think that is super important to include, so that we not only focus on Ukraine, which is very important too and relevant, but we also do not forget the Western Balkans and Turkey, and some of the old discussions within this theme. And finally, we will have Kristi Raik, director at the International Center for Defense and Security, also a TEPSA board member. And Kristi would kind of wrap the whole thing up in a way and expand the question and to a broader discussion on what does a geopolitical enlargement mean and what is the interplay between enlargement and European security and defense, especially in the case of Ukraine. So kind of bringing us back also to Ukraine, where we started during this morning. I guess that will be this session. We are supposed to finish 4:15, maybe a little longer, not too much, because then we will all move towards the center of the city and towards the reception at the French Embassy, which is at 5:30, where we'll have a short presentation by the 3 embassies on the Weimar Triangle. But I'm going to repeat that following this session. So please, our first speaker, Saskia.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction, for the invitation. First a disclaimer. I'm hearing myself very strange. Am I okay? I hear myself like a robot. I will neglect it. First of all, disclaimer. I think I will not tell you anything that you don't know already. But I wanted to take this opportunity to discuss 2 lessons from the previous enlargement rounds, and especially for the current member states. Because in the discussions we talk a lot about what has to happen in the candidate countries. Also, my fellow panelists will talk about that. But I wanted to take it back to the current member states because I think we also have a lot of homework to do. The first lesson is that we should not neglect public opinion, which, of course, coming from a Eurosceptic, from an enlargement skeptic country like the Netherlands, I think this is a very important topic, that we take citizens along in that process and that we not start with that when the accession treaties are being negotiated. And the second one, you already mentioned that in your introduction, is that guarantees at the gate in terms of the rule of law, so the Copenhagen criteria, they're not enough. And we see that already in the current member state, that they go back on the rule of law. So I think it's very important to fix that first. So concerning the first lesson, public opinion, I think we don't talk about that a lot. What I mentioned, it's not very salient. When I'm speaking for my own country, the Netherlands, nobody talks about enlargement. Ukraine is a bit salient, but the Western Balkans, I think it's really not there in public opinion, in public debate. But when you ask people, they're not very positive. And I think on average in the EU, when you see the last Eurobarometer, I think it's around 50%. So taking all the candidate countries together, with like on the bottom, Austria and France, only 35% supporting EU enlargement. In my own country, it's around 50%. And as people in this audience know, France will very likely have a referendum in case of enlargement. The Netherlands might also have a referendum. It will not be a binding one, but since we had the Ukraine referendum also, I think it's very difficult to neglect. So I think our politicians, we should really take it into consideration. I think it's also a task for us as Think Tank community that we really try to raise this awareness in the European publics, in the member state countries, that we really take citizens along. And of course, we discussed it when we were discussing, it's very tricky because politicization can also backlash, it can also turn against you. But I really much want to make the argument that we still have time to do so, and we should not wait until the accession treaties are being negotiated. I think, speaking for my own country, the Clingendael did a public opinion survey on Dutch opinion on enlargement, and concerns are very much rooted in, of course, the costs. I'm sorry, we are Dutch, but also on effectiveness of decision making, migration, and of course the rule of law. So there are pretty much concerns, especially when it comes to the Western Balkans. So I think it's very important to also discuss the trade-offs when it comes to enlargement. And I think what the Dutch really need is this geopolitical narrative. We are far away from where the issues are, but it also affects us. And I think that geopolitical narrative, it's not really resonating yet in the Netherlands, and I think also not really in France and Germany. So what we have to do, the first one is that we really give citizens not only the feeling, but that we actually involve them in co-shaping the enlargement process, so that they are not presented with a fait accompli. And that we really discuss these trade-offs that I just mentioned, one of them being the geopolitics versus the costs. I mean, speaking to Dutch people, there are also costs of not enlarging, and we never really discussed that. And I think that's really a task of us at Clingendael and as a think tank community in large. And because I really believe that enlargement requires democratic mandates, especially when you talk about the rule of law and democracy. We cannot continue this process when we don't have this fix in our own member states. Then the second lesson from the previous enlargement is, of course, the rule of law, and that we cannot take this lightheartedly. And we, of course, only have to look at Hungary, Poland until recently, but also Slovakia. Of course, the current candidate countries are, except for Montenegro, and they're not ready to join. Montenegro, Albania make a lot of progress, but they're not joining. And especially because this geopolitical urgency is so high, it is possible that countries will join when they are not really ready. And until recently, the European Union, of course, really had no effective instruments to tackle this. But what I wanted to say is that this is really not just a problem of the East. And I think in the Western European member states, we really like to point our finger not only to the candidate countries, but also to Hungary and Poland. But we also have to look at what's happening in Western European countries with the attacks on academia, on journalists, on think tanks, and of course on the media. So I think we really have to have a debate and a narrative how valuable it is to protect the EU values. One of them being the rule of law. And I really think that we should fix this first before enlargement. Maybe they can go parallel. We can discuss that later. One of the things that have to happen in my view is of course Article 7, but it will not change. I think we have to deal with that. If there will be no treaty change, then Article 7 will stay as it is. But luckily, the European Union has more instruments. Had to cut the funds or suspend the funds. We did that for Hungary, we did that for Poland, but there's still quite some hiccups in my point of view. The one of them being that they're not used consistently, and that comes back to my previous question. It's really only about attacking Hungary, Poland until recently, but the Commission is not really using these instruments consistently in countries that on the whole do and in general do still very well, but have these problems concerning the media and journalists, which also happens in my own country, which always scored very high on the rule of law, but it's now very fast going downhill. Not being too pessimistic, but I think it's a concern, and I think the Commission also has instruments to tackle that as well. And second thing that the second recommendation is that the instruments have to be much more clearer. It's now not really clear which instruments are used under which conditions and under which conditions payments are given back, like what happened to Hungary, but also Poland. To sum up, I think enlargement really entails some risks in terms of the rule of law, but I think these risks really can be mitigated once we have this rule of law toolbox fixed. And also we can, as member states, we can do a lot more to support reform process in candidate countries, and not only the institutional reforms, but also supporting civil society and the media and journalists. Then the third one, what I started with, is really get people involved in the enlargement process, so people in current member states. And I think it's very important that we have brave politicians, which are really much able to provide these political narratives in order to get these democratic mandates. That was it.
Whoa!
Am I so fast? Yeah. I have some points for discussion, but
super. Stay tuned. Keep your questions. Many things super relevant to discuss. Not only focus on Hungary, but also look at the Western European countries, and also this about the trade-offs, the geopolitical, the trade-off of enlargement. Be sure to actually communicate and to have that more highlighted. We will return to that during a Q&A. So now we move to Danijela.
Okay, thank you
Montenegro.
very much. Yes, direct view from the Montenegro. Just a year ago at the PPC in Budapest, I spoke about the strategic moment of enlargement for Montenegro. On that time, it looked that the EU is rebooting its enlargement mechanism, but on that time, path of membership is still seen as a long and challenging process. Today, in Copenhagen, PPC, the enlargement process has been tested once again, and this time in the climate of where geopolitics matter as much as technical reforms. So let's perform wisely now, and let's start with the question: what is the context of enlargement? Yes, I turn it. So, okay. Hopefully. So let's talk about the context of enlargement today. Of course, we are facing geopolitical tensions, and they are just like a pot that was bubbling for a long time ago and now is boiling over. In the heart of this problem, I can see erosion of trust and growing sense of unfairness within the international system and between countries. The European Union has played for decades a key role in supporting Western Balkan countries towards democracy and economic prosperity. Yet, despite all this support, genuine democratic and economic transformation remained slow. So I think that we should ask ourselves why. Is it due to domestic challenges, external pressures, lack of sustained political will? or it is a result of larger system that promises integration but delivers it so slow to inspire real change. I think that these are the questions that we must confront if we are serious about the future of the continent, not only as a peaceful and prosperous, but also fair and inclusive for all. So far, the region has faced this stage, gradual, differentiate integration. And I think that we all can agree that we haven't seen so much success. Let me be honest, as I'm coming from Montenegro, all these terms for me have the same meaning: no integration. I'm really sorry to say that, but it is how it feels. I do understand there are many doubtful voices, not only in Brussels, they're also in EU capitals, but also in our acceding countries, who argue that Union simply won't be able to do both widen and to deepen. That system is too stretched, that appetite is too low, and the politics is too complicated. Instead of that, I belong and stand with those who believe that the European Union must be bold, that it must commit to internal reform and enlargement together, no one after another, but as a part of shared and strategic process, successful wave of enlargements with successful waves of reforms should go hand of hand. Are we facing in the region significant consequences of these policies, stage, gradual, differentiate today? My short answer is yes. While Europe's attention highly remains focused on Ukraine, tension in the Western Balkans is rising. Alarm bells are ringing in Belgrade, in Kosovo, and Sarajevo. Geopolitical actors in the region are very, very active in the region. And their interest is not cooperation. Their interest is more making the house with a strategy that is really very clear in their intention to keep region at the edge, to destabilize population, wage cyber and hybrid welfare. Yes, maybe recently you have heard the talk or the word Balkan Spring as a new opportunity for Serbia, for North Macedonia, even Croatia to reconnect with European project. But opportunity without action is just the words. From my side, the truth is this: 6 Western Balkan countries must be integrated to the European Union as a strategic necessity and security imperative. What can be done, not only with Danish presidency, but even further? A lot, and then sometimes some more. Let's start with the EU growth plan. And just start with our very general sentence that this is the world of high uncertainty and frequent shocks, and there is no room to delay the reforms. European Union step out bold and towards Western Balkan countries with the growth plan for the Western Balkans with very clear purpose to support region in regional integration, to implement reform, build resilience, stimulate sustainable growth, prepare countries for EU membership. Of course, this is the short-term plan from 2024 to 2027, 6 billion of financial assistance, 2 billion of grants, 4 billion of concession loans. But this funding is not funding. This funding brings responsibility because all Western Balkan countries, they needed to actually link all those funds with very intense reforms. So each country of 6 Western Balkan countries, they needed to define tailored reform agenda jointly developed with European Commission. And I would just want to stress the points of the reform agendas: economic competitiveness, rule of law and public administration, green and digital transition, alignment with EU single market. Today, I'm really pleased to say that all Western Balkan countries have adopted their reform agendas by the end of 2024. And I'm pleased also to share with you something that gives me real hope, that Montenegro just received first financial tranche from this package last week of 27 million. Of course, half of it is budget support for necessary reforms and half for infrastructure. But what is more important, this first payment confirms that Montenegro is a reliable reform partner and that we are ready to do more. Also, I would like to add that regional economic integration is going further. In October 2025, Montenegro and Albania will become part of fully integrate of single euro payment area. So it will bring a lot of benefits because we can send money to European Union fast and cheap. So probably it will boost business activity. Through this growth plan, free Wi-Fi area is increasing. We reduce roaming cost in the region and significantly reduce with the EU. And addition to that, public support remains strong, not only for the European Union, but based on the latest Balkan Barometer published by Regional Cooperation Council in the Sarajevo, 82% of Western Balkan citizens support regional cooperation. Let me say something about negotiation process of the region. So from April this year, Albania opened 16 chapters out of 33. Serbia, naughty student, naughty child of EU, opened 22. Not so much progress there, but Montenegro. So we closed 3 chapters in December. We planned much more than it is, but just compare the numbers. So it's 3 chapters, and in previous 12 years we closed 3. So it's 100%. It's in relative terms. So during the last year, of course, we always want more. For now, for this year, actually, we prepare 6 chapters to close. It is already submitted by the March of the current year to the European Commission, and we are waiting a positive reaction first of the European Commission and hopefully with the member states. So we are very optimistic, and we believe that during this year there is going to be 2 intergovernment conferences, one in June and one in December, and that we are hopefully close all the 6. I also want to mention that in December we plan to close 31 chapter, which is foreign policy, but just in the last moment, Croatians open some questions. So, but it's very important to say that it is not about blockage of the process, that we have to resolve some problems, that we have very good cooperation and bilateral relation with Croatia. Their experts are fully helping our negotiation process and how to fill all these closing provisions, and based on bilateral, so very effective dialogue has been in place, and we are all happy how things are going. So there are some ideas that even in this June we can close 31st, but okay. But what we are doing right now, we are doing for our job and our homework for the next year. So we it's in final phase about 20 to 25 laws that we are going to go push through the parliament. So, and then we will be able to fulfill all the technically, of course, closing provisions for next 20 chapters that we are planning to close. Actually, this is not real utopia. This is the document Barometer 26 that Montenegrin government designed and tailored with European Commission as a fast track towards EU. Of course, the final words will have member states, but of course what we would expect from Montenegro, we really like merit-based system. We do our best to fulfill our criteria, but also we would really like and fight for fair and transparent process of integration. Last but not the least, US and the Western Balkans. So yes, we are experiencing trade war, but for Albania and Montenegro, US applies tariffs of only 10%, and for rest of the Western Balkan region is 33, 35. So it could be very, very significant economic opportunity and a push for these two countries because they can be important gateways to regional trade with the US market. So I will close with this picture right now, but of course I'm here for the questions.
So the picture is that Montenegro really followed the procedure, did its homework and so on. So, and you all what that you described and mentioned, but still, yeah, still not good enough. Frustration?
Yes, of course. That's what I say. Of course, we are deeply frustrated in Western Balkans. I'm full of confidence telling you this, but still deep inside, I still doubt. So we recently had a conference in the Brussels, so I have contact with one official highly ranked in the European Commission who worked partially 15 years ago in EU delegation, and we had a meeting and the lunch, and he told me, you are going to be part of European Union. You are a professor. You have to teach and actually spread that positive notion to your students. So let's believe. And somehow we have to negotiate still with Dutch and France. That's the only two small items, but we are there. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Kristi, do we have this geopolitical or a moment where geopolitics can actually perhaps meet Montenegro? Or how does it look from your position?
So thank you first of all to DEES for organizing this event, for hosting TEPSA. Happy to be here and talk about enlargement and geopolitics. So when my country joined with the Big Bang enlargement in 2004, it was the normative arguments that prevailed. It was all about securing democracy and freedom and human rights and rule of law in Central and Eastern Europe. Security was left to NATO, but even in the NATO enlargement, the same normative arguments were really the most persuasive ones that in the end convinced all the member states to embark on enlargement. While the logic of geopolitics in these times was supposed to belong to the history and not to the future of Europe. And here we are in 2025, geopolitics is back with a vengeance, and enlargement is back on the top of EU agenda. In 2022, when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia happened, the EU did respond with a number of steps that actually made the EU much more of a geopolitical actor. The EU did enter this conflict over the future of European order, where Russia was challenging and wishing to actually break the post-Cold War security order in Europe. And in this situation, the EU very clearly took the side of Ukraine in a violent geopolitical conflict against a major power. So this was something unprecedented for the European Union. The EU started to provide extensive military assistance to Ukraine, in addition to economic and other forms of aid. It offered membership perspective on the ground that this was now a normative geopolitical necessity. And it also took a stance on the EU's future borders by saying Ukraine will become a member, we support Ukraine's territorial integrity, and all of this in a situation where actually the borders were being violently contested. So all of these were really big steps, but at the same time, the full-scale war in Ukraine did expose Europe's dependence on the US more than before. It was the United States that took the lead in responding to Russia's full-scale invasion, took the lead in providing military support to Ukraine, and then Europeans gradually followed up and increased their contribution. Then we come to 2025, Donald Trump becoming president of the United States once again. And I have been really kind of surprised to see that for many European countries, especially Western European countries, this has been a bigger shock than the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But now this sense that the US might actually abandon Europe is something that has started a whole new process in our discussions about Europe taking more responsibility for its security and defense. Unfortunately, Europe didn't start to do enough after February 2022, although there were, of course, some new efforts made, but we needed yet another shock. And so now we are in a situation where we still have this dependence of European security on the US. We also have the war in Ukraine continuing, and we have Russia as a long-term security threat to Europe. We all agree on that. Quite a set of challenges. So in this geopolitical environment, the EU is trying to move ahead with the enlargement process, saying that this is necessary for European security and indeed in order to really achieve security and stability in the current candidate countries, Ukraine, Moldova, also the Western Balkans, we need to complete the enlargement process. But then, although we repeat this argument of geopolitical necessity, I think there are many hurdles on the way of actually completing successfully this supposedly geopolitical enlargement. And one is that the EU is still not a fully fledged geopolitical actor on its own. We discussed it also in the previous session. The EU is still far from able to take responsibility for its own security. And then looking at Ukraine in particular, the EU does not have the kind of capability and also, I would say, the political will needed to decisively push for an end to the war. It is not able to provide Ukraine with security guarantees, which will be necessary for EU enlargement to actually be possible. First, we need to solve these questions and the war, offer security guarantees to Ukraine. That's where we have then different coalitions of the willing stepping in, and hopefully we will see more leadership on the side of the big European countries, but then also some coalitions of smaller countries. Denmark has been mentioned positively as one of the pioneers in supporting Ukraine. The Nordic Baltic countries are, I think, a strong regional grouping. So we really need to work hard to actually make Europe, first of all, capable of addressing these geopolitical hurdles before we can confidently move on with the enlargement process. And also a further challenge is that it was mentioned before, many citizens of the EU don't actually buy this geopolitical argument. And this is also something that our political leaders need to work on. Why is it that the accession of Ukraine or Western Balkan countries is necessary for the future of European security? I don't really hear these arguments very well across Europe. And we still approach the question of Ukraine's accession more as a matter of Ukraine knocking on the door, and then we have all these conditions which Ukraine has to meet. So we have this formal accession process, and I'm not arguing against the necessity for having these accession criteria, but then we also need to have a new framework for talking about enlargement, where we need to recognize that in future, and especially now that the US does intend to reduce its commitment to Europe, Europe will need Ukraine for its defense in the long term in order for Europeans to be able to push back the Russian threat and to create credible deterrence and defense against Russia. We need to have Ukraine on our side with their defense industry, with their experienced military, also with their strong political will and understanding of what is at stake geopolitically. So let me conclude by stressing that enlargement in the current geopolitical environment, it has to move ahead with a parallel process of the EU and Europe. I mean, the EU also together with non-EU European countries, becoming still a much stronger geopolitical actor so that it can resolve the geopolitical hurdles to enlargement and then also gradually take over the US role in European security. And this was also raised in the previous panel, that indeed the US has made it very clear that they intend to reduce their commitments. But for the time being, let's remember, NATO is still there. That is still the framework for European defense. What the EU is doing, and when you read the white paper, it's all written in the way that EU defense initiatives are complementary to NATO. And then it's up to member states to look at the NATO capability targets, look at the EU instruments, and then do what they can to strengthen European capabilities. That is what is needed. And Europeans need to take leadership in NATO. They need to take leadership in addressing the war in Ukraine, providing security guarantees for Ukraine, and then keeping in sight this long-term prospect of actually integrating candidate countries to Europe. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Before I move on to questions, there's one big dilemma here, and that's the geopolitical moment, the necessity, and then what Saskia talked about, the mandate from European populations, and you also addressed this, Kristi, which is an ongoing issue here. And then I was actually, if I may, I take the liberty here, being the moderator, also because Europe needs Ukraine for its defense. For you and me, Baltic Sea countries, of course. But how does it look from, for instance, colleagues in Spain, Portugal, Italy? Would that, I mean, is that the same feeling?
I suppose it's really a question to our Western and Southern European colleagues here. But I think we are in a new stage in this discussion now. And this real sense that the US may actually abandon Europe, this has provoked a new discussion. So we need to take a completely fresh look at what we mean by European strategic autonomy. In the past, we have had a lot of words, but much less actions. Now we are in a situation where we have the NATO defense plans. That is still the only credible thing that we have for European defense. And then we have this prospect that the US wants to reduce its presence. So we need to have this very practical exercise of thinking through. So, okay, how do we Europeans replace? Well, the urgent task is to replace the US aid to Ukraine, but then also to replace gradually what the US does for European defense. And how does it concern then all these countries that are geographically further away from Russia and Ukraine? Obviously, if the EU as an institution will fail, and if it will be at some point one of the member states will be attacked, and then the EU is not able to respond and to defend its members, then I'm afraid it's going to be the end of the EU. And I don't need to explain that this will have very severe consequences for all of Europe.
And maybe I can add to that, because in the Netherlands you see a division and you also see it changing a bit. If you would ask it 1 year ago, then you wouldn't feel that urgency. I think now it's changing, but I think not many people have this resilience package in their homes. I think it is like 10-15% that has it. I don't know the numbers, so don't pick no numbers, but not many people have it. So we don't feel the threat that much. But now with the sabotage on the North Sea, it's changing a bit. It's in our news a lot. So you see it shifting, but it's quite late. So.
Okay, I will. I think that your minister said that strategic framework of the global world is changing, and of course strategic framework of the European Union is changing, and for me it looks that we all have to have new lenses or to see it in many different shades. And okay, you mentioned South partners, Portugal, Spain, but finally, okay, not maybe finally, but they faced one day cut of electricity, water supplies, and probably it pushed them thinking, is it really about just technical thing, or it is part of this global change of strategic environment, probably some cyber attacks from geopolitics, so that they can put them more in to think that maybe they are not just isolated island and the things will hit them. And tourism season is coming, so we all worry.
All right, so I invite questions from the public. I know we have sit up here from Barcelona, so of course I would be curious about whether they have an answer. So if I start with the Funda and the next one, so I...
Yeah. Funda Tekin, Institute für Europäische Politik in Berlin. So thank you for this very interesting panel and really touching upon all the different aspects and all the dilemmas actually that we're facing. And I would have also actually asked the question, Kristi, with regards to the geographical issue. And I think we really need to link that also to the, to the public support, because of course we experts might actually, have the threat perceptions and be more aware of the general context. And I was also thinking, this is a question to you, Saskia, with regards when the minister said this morning that in Denmark public opinion is now very in favor of enlargement. I was wondering, how does that look like in 2 years, maybe? Because also in Germany there was a very positive movement in summer 2022. It has dissolved by now again. So I think this is really something that we have to keep in mind with regards to public opinion. But my question would also go to, or comment and question to Danijela, because you said when you hear all those, concepts of gradual integration, staged accession, you basically hear no membership. And of course, I can understand that feeling, and also, knowing that Turkey does not like the term privileged partnership, although I think that privileged partnership is a different concept than staged accession. I really think we might need to turn the narrative around here, because if it's a merit-based approach, and the process is so long, I think staged accession could actually also help make the candidate countries feel the progress. So if you have really progress and reforms, and then also move closer to the European Union in terms of staged accession, or gradual integration, it depends then on the concept. This is really then that you feel the merit, and that might actually help really also then building up the trust in the process again. So for me, it's more a positive connotation to that. And I was just wondering whether you could also relate to that, or whether you really think that and this maybe also then links back to the cherries that that Ian was hinting at. If you then really get the cherries for having progress, I think it might help the process.
So we take another one next to Funda.
Thank you very much, Ilke Teuger, Director of Global Policy Center, Madrid, Spain. Also, maybe I can just start with one quick sentence on the southern perspective on this. Of course, the geopolitical urgency or the sense of failure of security is not the same in Spain and in Estonia. This is very clear. But I think this doesn't necessarily mean that For example, Spanish citizens are not on board in advancing, deepening European security architecture or rethinking a European pillar in NATO or trying to discuss that. I know Spain is in more on the headlines about the defense spending conversations because of the nature of the government. So that's just politics because it's social democrats plus further left. So this is what we have at this point in time. But this doesn't change the fact that Spain, both the government and at the citizenry level, supports further integration. But I think there's also one important point that is made in the Spanish policy space that I would like to transmit, is that spending more at the national level does not add up to a more integrated European defense. And this is one of the very important speaking points in Spain. So it's the discussion shouldn't be only about increasing defense spending. Of course, this is more urgent and important, but it's not the only component granting us the possibility and capability of defending us in 2030, as your minister said. So after this mini intervention, here's my question for Kristi.
That's great.
Because this is, I think we have come a long way, even like 4 months since Donald Trump took office. Because in the beginning, my sense was like the Nordics and the Baltics are more trying to stick to the status quo, not letting the United States go, while the rest of the Europeans, starting with France, but not limited to, trying to rethink European security architecture as a whole. Now, from your comments and then from your conference back in Tallinn last week, I understand that we are actually converging in accepting Americans will go. We just need to buy time. And in the meantime, find a credible way to replace not just the forces, but also intelligence, even start thinking about nuclear umbrella. So my question is, the European security architecture was done with the Americans, even by the Americans after the Second World War. We rediscussed this after the end of the Cold War and stayed in the same structure. Now, for me, there's a new opportunity to revisit this and fit this to 21st century. And this should be done with the Americans, actually, but realistically assuming that they will withdraw, and they will withdraw with all the elements possible in 5 to 10 years. How do we do that? What should be the steps that are taken by the EU and other European coalitions of the willing to make this orderly phase out from the American commitments? It can be a European NATO, but if that's so, how are we going to take over the command structures, the force structures, the intelligence structures, etc.? Do we have a plan for this? Because for me, it is the real question facing us for guaranteeing a European security architecture that works for all the continent, countries in the continent. Thank you.
Are you taking notes? I have 4 more, and I think I'm going to take 1 more over here. Yes, exactly. And then back to you, and then with the free rest.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I'm intern at the Austrian Embassy in Copenhagen here. And my question is to Saskia. It's about the Copenhagen dilemma. Because the problem is that Copenhagen criteria are like, they do set a very high standard of rule of law. The problem is that this only goes for candidate countries, whereas after accession, there is no proper mechanism how to keep those rule of law standards which were set before. Especially when many of the EU rule of law toolbox are considered weak or just like soft law, kind of like the rule of law report. And how can the EU face the Copenhagen dilemma in the regards of the rule of law?
Okay, back to you. Who will go first?
I can go first.
Yes, you go, Saskia.
Yeah, I think there were two questions addressed to me. First, the question of by Funda. No, I think that the Danish minister was quite positive, also about Danish public opinion. At the last Eurobarometer, it's around 61%, 60%, so it's not really high. There's a majority, but of course, Eurobarometer does not make a difference between Ukraine and the other candidate countries, and I think there's a big difference here. Also in Denmark, I assume. In the Netherlands, there's a big difference. There's still 70% in favor of Ukraine accession, but really below 50% for all the rest of the candidates. Turkey even, yeah, really low. So I think, yeah, there's a very big difference. And I think the interesting thing is with public opinion that enlargement is not very salient in a lot of current member states, in the Western member states, but it can become salient once populist right parties will take this up, and it will especially happen when there will be a referendum. So this is the concern. So politicians can say, okay, it's not really a salient issue, let's not discuss it, let's depoliticize it, but it will be politicized once there will be a referendum. So that's really my concern. And then the other question about the Copenhagen dilemma, I think you really summarized the dilemma quite well. I'm a little bit more positive than you are about the instruments that the EU has now, especially considering the next MFF. If this budget conditionality will still be part of it and even extended, then I think the EU has a strong instrument. At least when it's applied consistently. So that's what I mentioned in my kickoff. That now it's really to attack Hungary, but it should also be to tackle like the smaller scale attacks on the media, on journalists, on judges. And I think it's not done that properly now. But the instruments are there, and it's so much better than we had before. So I'm a little bit more optimistic than you are.
Danijela?
Okay. Montenegro is really focused to full membership, no doubt. So no even a word in Montenegro in political or public opinion that we are talking about stage, not even in the region. Maybe very often European or member states accuse us that there is no regional cooperation. We are very solidar. We stick together, and Montenegro probably, if it's going to be full member state first, I of course strongly cheer for that. Probably followed with Albania a few years. We will support very strongly integration of the all Western Balkan countries on the same term, sharing with our expertise, our knowledge, our enlargement way, not only with them, as similar as we are replicating Slovenia, Croatian enlargement process and closing provisions. Probably all the rest of the country of the region can use all our framework. And of course, we support strongly accession of Moldova and Ukraine. So I think that last week your minister said that was last week in Podgorica. No, Monday and Tuesday, and last week it was President of European Council, and I think that in Min there was a President of Moldova and probably Zelensky. We are all signing this contract agreement of understanding to deliver everything what we have done in enlargement process to those countries to speed up the process.
All right. Kristi?
Yes, thank you. So both Funda and Ilke were kind of asking about the same issue, of course, to what extent we still have this difference between Northeast and South. I would say on threat perceptions, one more thing we haven't discussed so much yet is the non-military threats and all the so-called hybrid attacks by Russia, the threat of sabotage, attacks against infrastructure, disinformation campaigns. That is something we see all over Europe. And I'm amazed that often I still get questions from Western European colleagues kind of assuming that in the Baltic states we are much more exposed or getting much more of that. But no, actually it's not the case. Nowadays we are getting less of that. And I think it's above all the big European countries, Germany, France, that are the main targets because their position is decisive and their support to Ukraine is decisive. And of course, preferably Russia would break European unity and break our organizations without without a single shoot, just with non-military methods. That's what they are using against all of us. And the goal, of course, is to change the European security order and to have recognition to the Russian sphere of influence and the very principles of European security. Now, what is new currently is that the US, to some extent, seems to share the Russian view of security order, right? And even if the US is still there in NATO and hasn't withdrawn so far and still has its troops here and provides the collective defense, my sense is that it's kind of doing it for the wrong reasons. It's no more about defending our shared values and defending the European security order the way we want to defend it. But it's now all about this geopolitical competition. And having said that, I mean, still, Ilke, we have maybe come closer to some extent, but the countries in the Baltic Sea region are still doing everything possible to keep the US engaged as long as possible, because we don't have any other option. It takes years for Europeans to build up the capabilities that are needed to replace the US. So in our view, Europe should not do anything to push the US away. We are just getting this message now so clearly from the Americans that they plan withdrawal. So the best possible scenario is then to do this withdrawal in a managed, gradual way, rather than with a big drama and shock and suddenly leaving us all vulnerable. So this is now the positive scenario. And where also I would say in our region the views have not changed at all is that NATO is the framework for European defense. Now it's all about strengthening the European pillar and having the same command and control structures, the same defense plans that we have, but taking a bigger role for Europeans in these structures. And then we will see, maybe one day it actually leads to Europeans taking over most of the functions, but that's a bit too early to predict. But what the EU defense is about, it's a bit different role. It's about defense industry, strengthening the capabilities, and then of course the integration part of it, which indeed it's really necessary. Even if we leave the EU aside, for NATO it's also necessary. For Europeans to be able to meet the NATO capability targets, European countries need to do much more together, multinational projects, EU-level investment. Otherwise, we will never get to the sufficient level of capabilities. And that's where the EU then steps in. And of course, I agree that just looking at the percentage of spending is not enough or not quite adequate. It just happens to be the only thing that President Trump is interested in. And so in order to keep the US engaged for the time being, we have to somehow show that the figures are changing. But what matters is the real capabilities that Europeans need to develop in cooperation.
Thank you so much, Kristi. So now I have 4 people on my list over here, and Peter and German guy and Jim. Sorry.
Thank you.
Please, and please
my
introduce
name is
yourself.
Andrea Etető. I'm coming from Hungary, and I would like to have a comment on Hungary and focusing on Hungary. So I understand that the European Commission had lots of things to do, and Trump and the USA and lots of turbulences, but I still think that in the meantime you still do not really focus enough on Hungary, because the situation has got worsened a lot in Hungary. And I'm not exaggerating, perhaps you think, but no, I think Orban is a Russian agent, and he does everything to destabilize the Balkans. And, you know, some days ago, the Hungarian spies were arrested in Ukraine and spying for Russia and things like that. And he cooperates with Dodik. He finances the Romanian far-right guy who hates anyway the Hungarian minority. So much to the bullshit of protecting Hungarian minority. And the new civil law they are planning to accept is worse than in Georgia. So anybody anytime who receives EU money, for example, Horizon project, can be a foreign agent and dangerous for the country. And also the history against Ukraine is pulled up to a very high level. So media sources and people were listed to spread Ukrainian propaganda, which means that they spoke sympathetically about the Ukrainian victims. That's the Ukrainian propaganda, they say. So it is a very dirty thing which is coming, and because Orban feels that he loses popularity very much, so he will try everything and he will do everything. So I would suggest to the Commission, if they have instruments, to apply it now and apply it strongly, take away the veto right and take away the agricultural money or anything they can, because anyway it will be too late. And I'm not sure that the elections will take place next year, because anything can happen anytime. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, thank you. Over here, I'm going to keep you 5 more minutes, so everybody has a chance to either make a comment or ask a question.
Thank you. My name is Peter Ries from the Parliamentary Department, and thank you to the organizers and the panelists for super topical presentations. This year, 30 year after Dayton, I'm happy to focus on Western Balkan as well. And unfortunately, some of the countries in the region are very much dominated by internal cleavages, not least Bosnia-Herzegovina. And do the European Union have the sufficient instruments to deal with such problems? Or who can assist in this case? Can Montenegro assist? Do we still rely upon the US to make a deal in Bosnia-Herzegovina? Or how do we move on? I'll assist a group of parliamentarians in a visit to Sarajevo in a few weeks. So in case you have some kind of key message to me, I'll be utmost grateful. Thank you.
Super, excellent. Thank you, Peter. And then my friend from Germany. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much. Last time I looked at my passport, I was still Austrian.
Sorry.
But that's okay.
Sorry. Well, that's a very...
That's okay, don't worry. Don't worry, I know you're Dutch, probably.
So just tell me your name again.
Yes, I'm still Paul Schmidt from the Austrian Society for European Politics. Here comes my question. Saskia, I thank you. I think you very rightly mentioned public opinion. Now, Saskia, the question to you. Imagine I was a very anti-EU enlargement politician from the Netherlands, from Austria, from wherever. You fly back to Amsterdam now, you meet him in the airport, no television cameras on, and you talk about the panel here. And he asks you, what does enlargement have to do with security? Why couldn't we have a much closer cooperation in terms of security without enlargement? What would be your answer? How would you convince him? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul from Austria. I know, I'm going to try. I work on it. Sorry. Jim, you will have the last comment, question, whatever.
Yes,
Help me
I
out.
take it that you are Swedish. Oh, sorry.
But that's normal with my name.
10
That
seconds.
happens all the time.
Really 10 seconds. A methodological question, because I think there's some misunderstanding, Danijela. You seem to oppose staged accession to full membership. That's not at all the way I see things. Staged accession is a instrument to reach full enlargement. You can't oppose the two. If you oppose the two, there will be no integration. So it's an instrument which helps you get into full integration. Sorry.
All right, thank you so much. And then we will have your final comments here. And before closing, keep your seats, because I promised my colleague Mikkel Runge Olsen, who's been in charge, so been part of a TEPSA publication, and he wants to make an announcement before we move to the French embassy. Please, the word is yours.
Shall I start again? Maybe to start with the last question, and because I'm really challenged by this question, I think this is a very, very good question. I think it depends pretty much on which anti-enlargement politician you ask. There are many in the Netherlands, but my answer would be to, like, if it's not coming from the populist right, that security is really important for our values, and this is really what's at stake. And I think this is sinking in the Netherlands. And I think and we are still coming into grips with the fact that the US is withdrawing. We were really shocked about that still. But I think now there's really much at stake. The Ukraine is fighting for our values. So I think that resonates also with the anti-enlargement parties on the right, as long as it's not the radical right, because they don't care about these EU values that much. That would be a little bit my cynical answer. But I'm very much open to suggestions, because, as I said, there are many anti-enlargement, or not anti, but enlargement skeptic politicians in the Netherlands, in the center as well. And maybe about Hungary, I couldn't agree more with what you were saying. I'm afraid that the EU is giving up on Hungary. That we don't take Orban seriously anymore, and that we think that we can do without Hungary, and which, of course, for the Hungarians is dramatic. And I also think that the money was released. Part of the money was released way too soon. That was, of course, a political issue, political argument, and that's why I'm really pleading for more consistent use and a more transparent use of these instruments. And I also think that they should apply to much more funds, also, which really hits Hungary. But of course, the difficult issue with this is those instruments also affect the people. So of course it affects the corrupt politicians, but it also affects the people. So I also understand that the Commission is a bit cautious, but I agree with you that I share your worries.
Me? So gradual. It's how to say. It's to find balance. So there is demand and supply for enlargement. If we set it here, balance it here. But if we at least try to put demand for enlargement there, maybe we will push balance somewhere among these, and that's very low. It's economic, it's barging. I would just like to address your question, asking direct solution for everything. And I very often, when I face with that question, would like to answer. If I would have that answer, I would be here. I would be professor. I would be retired at Caribbean in the yacht. So that's the answer. $1 million.
Kristi?
Yes, very quickly. First on Hungary, I think the sense in the EU is now that we just have so much on our plate, like huge issues, that we just try to find ways to move ahead without Hungary. And it's like really sad, and I do hope that there are then still people and processes that actually deal with the question of Hungary and the question of rule of law, and how the EU can in future do better in possible similar situations. But indeed, now it's all about circumventing and moving ahead without or despite Hungary's opposition. And I have noticed also that Hungary is really making a campaign against Ukraine's membership with very dubious arguments. So this is then a challenge also for all of us to have our counter-arguments and our own calculations, and this discussion in the EU is also still only starting, like what then actually are all the budgetary and institutional and other implications of Ukraine's accession. So Hungary comes with its arguments, which are really, I think, outrageous and not really accurate at all. But we need to have then very good responses on our side. And then very quickly on security and why not cooperate on security without enlargement. Well, there is a real threat that these candidate countries turn against us if the EU fails to respond to their aspiration to become members. They have applied for membership. And just look at Georgia as a warning example of what may happen when the Georgians feel that they have been let down and the EU is not really serious about integrating them. And so now we have Georgia turning towards Russia instead, with really dangerous geopolitical consequences for Europe. Thanks.